Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a look at something quite different, really challenging actually. It's a set of sources called The Final Scientific Warning to Humanity.
Yes, from Dr. Mahmoudzhan Kучкарова and the OTA Academy of Human Language.
Exactly. And our goal here isn't, to say if these claims are true or false. It's more about exploring them, really unpacking these alternative views on history, language, consciousness.
Right.
And understanding what this material is actually suggesting. It really pushes us to look beyond the usual stories we're told.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
These sources really ask you to critically examine what you think you know. They force you to consider this possibility that information itself, maybe even our ability to grasp truth, is, compromised. It sets a pretty intense tone from the start.
Okay, so let's dive into that intensity. The source kicks off with a really stark idea. It says humanity is trapped in what it calls a double blockade. Let's try to unpack that. What exactly is this double blockade?
Well, according to this perspective, it has two main parts, both pretty alarming. The first they call intellectual castration.
Okay.
Which they define as basically humanity losing its natural ability to sort truth from manipulation.
Right.
And the second part is what they term a neurotic acceptance of the nuclear threat. The idea that war, specifically nuclear war, has become so normalized that it's just, an expected backdrop.
Accepted, yeah.
Exactly. And what's key here, they argue, is that this isn't some accident. It's described as a purposeful detachment from the roots, from truth about language, thinking, where we come from, how we perceive things.
Purposeful detachment.
Yes. And the most dangerous part, they say, is losing the very ability to be aware.
Wow. Intellectual castration and neurotic acceptance.
That's heavy stuff. It sounds like they're suggesting a kind of mass delusion. So what does that actually mean for us? I mean, what's really at stake here if this view is anywhere near accurate? Well, if you take this perspective seriously, it suggests we're incredibly vulnerable. It implies our collective ability to understand reality, and maybe more importantly, to actually resist huge threats like nuclear war, has been systematically weakened. Think about it, a world where the lines between fact and fiction are so blurred, you can't even recognize real danger, let alone react properly. The source argues this lack of awareness makes us susceptible to repeating, catastrophic history.
That's a sobering thought. Definitely grabs your attention. And speaking of foundations, the source then goes way back, right to the beginning, challenging some core stories about language itself. Most of us know the Catholic tradition's view of the Garden of Eden, Adam, Eve, the serpent, the fruit as original sin, humanity's fall.
Right, that's a very familiar narrative.
Yeah.
But this Odom Tilly theory language of man presented here, it completely flips that script. It argues that scene was not a fall at all. It was an ascension.
An ascension? How so?
The text claims this was the exact moment when true language, symbolic thought, emotions, individual will, higher intellect, all of it emerged in humans. It wasn't a punishment. They frame it as this fundamental leap in human consciousness.
Okay, that is a radical shift. So here's the really interesting part. The source claims this huge development was then deliberately inverted in stories later on. Why? Why would anyone want to frame the birth of language negatively?
Well, the authors argue it was absolutely deliberate. The goal, they say, was to discredit language right from the start, frame it as a crime against God, a transgression.
Right.
And by making language seem sinful or flawed, the idea, according to the source, was to control the very tool of awareness, the word itself. If language's origin is tainted, it becomes something you can manage, restrict, maybe even suppress, basically controlling thought at its root.
That really changes how you might think about language. And this relook at origins seems to connect to an even bigger claim, this idea that nuclear wars aren't just modern threats, but maybe forgotten history. They mention Atlantis, Mu, Lemuria.
Yes, the material asserts that if you interpret historical and archaeological evidence through their specific lens, these advanced ancient civilizations weren't just lost to, say, floods or earthquakes.
No.
It claims they were artificially destroyed, using things like nuclear wars and climate weapon technologies. It's a claim that, really turns conventional history and archaeology completely upside down.
Absolutely. So, why the alleged cover-up? The source gives some pretty specific reasons why we supposedly aren't told about these ancient wars and advanced societies. What are they?
Okay, so according to this text, revealing this kind of history would do a few things that certain powers want to avoid. It would, as they put it, devalue modern religion.
By contradicting creation stories, presumably?
It would destroy scientific dogmas by showing a totally different path for technology and human development. and it would expose geopolitical power centers by revealing these long-term control mechanisms. And they make an even bolder claim that there's a linguistic code hidden for centuries that can actually dismantle what they call a 500-year construction of lies. This code, part of the Ode Antilles theory, is positioned as the key.
A hidden linguistic code. Okay, so if we follow this line of thinking ancient nuclear wars, then what about the global flood? Those myths are everywhere in almost every culture. Does the source have an explanation for that too?
It certainly does. The theory here is that the Great Flood wasn't natural, and it wasn't divine punishment either.
Then what?
It's described as a conscious sanitary cleansing, using water deliberately as a kind of planet reset button after some kind of nuclear catastrophe.
A planetary reset? Wow. For what purpose?
The stated aim, according to the source, was twofold. One, to erase previous civilizations, just wipe the slate clean, and two, to launch a renewed humanity, but one they describe as submissive and amnesiac.
Submissive and amnesiac.
Yes. And crucially, the source insists these wiped out ancient civilizations actually excelled us in language, science, and perception.
So this completely reframes our view of history. It suggests a deliberate, managed forgetting. What does that imply about what we might have lost? Not just cities, but something more.
It implies a massive, systematic loss. Not just knowledge or tech, but core human abilities. If those ancient people really were more advanced in language, science, perception, it suggests humanity before this supposed reset had a deeper, maybe more direct connection to reality, to knowledge.
And that connection was deliberately severed.
That's the argument, that our current state is a kind of controlled, diminished version of what humans were once capable of.
Okay, given all these incredibly radical claims about history, language, lost abilities, why does the source see this Ode Antilles theory itself as such a major threat to the current system?
The source boils it down to three core reasons why Ode Antilles is seen as dangerous. First, because it completely reinterprets the myth of sin as the beginning of thought. It flips a foundational narrative, calling it an awakening, not a fall.
Right, challenges the control narrative.
Exactly. Second, it claims to expose scientific manipulations by using language patterns, physiological symbolic patterns. They suggest understanding these reveals how science might have been steered away from certain truths.
Okay.
And third, it supposedly uncovers a global mechanism of enslavement, where language itself becomes a weapon, where our own consciousness becomes, as they put it, an interface of propaganda, suggesting language structure can control us without us realizing.
Those are definitely some high-stakes implications. So if it's considered such a threat, how does the source say this theory is actually treated out in the world today?
Well, according to the source, precisely because it's such a fundamental challenge, it gets actively suppressed. The authors claim Ode Antilles isn't recognized by established academies. You won't find it published in mainstream journals. Universities ignore it.
And they say it's rejected. Why?
Often, they claim, it's dismissed on the pretext of the author lacking a formal diploma or not having the standard academic credentials. Technicalities, basically.
Sounds like a tough road to get these ideas heard. And this suppression isn't just in academia, is it? The source points to a very modern digital example of information being blocked. What happened there?
Yeah, they describe a specific incident on YouTube involving Dr. Kучkarov's own live stream. They allege that a stream uploaded just hours before this source material was put together was suddenly backdated by YouTube.
Backdated?
Made to look as if it had actually finished 3 days earlier than it did. And the source doesn't see this as just some random glitch. They interpret it as deliberate, conscious, algorithmic meddling, designed specifically to cut reach, kill any momentum, disrupt interest, and stop the content from trending.
So active interference.
That's what they claim. They flat out call it digital dictatorship and a new inquisition, a modern form of censorship happening in real time.
If that's true, I mean, it raises a huge question, doesn't it? What does that tell us about information control today and how that affects our ability to learn, to find different perspectives, to even figure out what's true?
It paints a really concerning picture. You know, if something as basic as the timestamp on a video can potentially be manipulated to bury information, it suggests a level of control that's incredibly sophisticated, almost invisible.
Right.
It directly impacts our chance to find diverse views, check things for ourselves, really evaluate what we're being shown. It points towards a future where maybe algorithms, not human curiosity, decide which stories get traction and which just vanish.
A sobering thought indeed. So as we kind of bring this deep dive towards a close, the source circles back to this idea of a final warning. If humanity is being steered towards another nuclear catastrophe, what do they say is the ultimate thing at stake this time?
It's a truly grim warning they offer. The ultimate victim, they say, won't just be our physical bodies, our cities.
What then?
It will be the word, memory, language, and thought itself, the very essence of our conscious experience. They emphasize that this Autumn Tilley theory isn't just some academic idea. They position it as humanity's last shield against that total erasure.
So, from this perspective, true language isn't just communication. It's something much deeper, described as harmony with the body and nature, a way to feel, not to symbolize, a bridge to the authentic source of being.
Exactly. Not a barrier, but a connection. The ultimate mission presented in the source isn't just about exposing alleged manipulation. It's about the liberation of consciousness through a return to true language. They see it as the only way back to, well, our genuine human potential.
And there's a real sense of urgency in their final words, isn't there? Humanity have little time left to hear the truth before algorithms erase the last memory of it. That leaves us with a lot to think about. As you listen to all this, what really stands out to you? How does exploring these ideas make you think differently about the history we're taught, about language itself, or even about navigating information in our world today?
It certainly makes you question things. And the source leaves us with this one final, quite profound thought to mull over. The secret of man is in language. The secret of language is in man. Only true language can save true humanity.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into what is undeniably a provocative and, according to its authors, a very urgent warning.